This week I want to talk about The Falling Man from 1 week ago, September 11th, as well as the story of a quote-unquote romance here in Vietnam, and more news on the DNC and on Marianne Williamson and what the polls are looking like for what's coming up. So all this and more here today on Jinka Jabo. So let me get this first story out of the way, and I say out of the way because it kind of bums me out, and I don't really like talking about it, but it's my September 11th story. And I wasn't going to make a September 11 video because I think I've already told that story, and if not on this channel, I've told it a million times to everybody, how I was in high school in pottery class, and I heard it on the radio, and it was just a pretty terrifying day. But again, it happening in New York City, it felt very far removed from me, much more so than, say, the Columbine shootings, which happened in '99, a few years before that, when I started high school, which felt like it hit a bit closer to home because it was something that I could picture happening in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where I grew up. But then I found this article, I forget what page brought it to my attention, but it's from Esquire.com, and it's called The Falling Man, an Unforgettable Story. I'll put the link in the description below. And be prepared for it. It's a very emotional read, especially for Americans. And it starts out with a dramatic picture of what looks to be a cook, just a man just falling. He had jumped out of the World Trade Center and he's just plummeting to his death. And it gives a lot of details about how they weren't sure of his identity and it took a long time to track him down, but now they kind of know who he is, but there's still some dispute about it. And you look at the picture and you can see him very clearly. It's a very close, intimate picture of the kinds of shoes. You can see what shoes he's wearing. You can see he's wearing like a chef's smock, like he's dressed like a cook, someone who probably worked in one of the restaurants in one of the towers. And there are many pictures, but like the first picture is the most dramatic because it just shows him kind of lost, empty, just like accepting almost of his fate. The article goes into a lot of detail, and I encourage you to read it if you want just a sad, somber read, even though we are a week removed from September 11. But it really spoke to me because I remember seeing these pictures, maybe not this picture specifically, but seeing some pictures of people jumping out of buildings and being really terrified of that. Now, the article does say at some point that these images were censored, but I remember looking at print magazines back then, looking at Newsweek and seeing similar photos, if not this exact one, that showed people jumping out of windows. Now, my guttural reaction to that when I first saw it happening and reading this art, and before I even read this article, was thinking, why would anyone jump? I mean, isn't there possibly one life that was saved by a person who stayed at the top after or during the collapse or whatever, which is totally cynical, but I don't know. It's like that nightmare scenario you have in the dream where you think, well, if at least there's some hope, at least there's some shot of living before the building collapsed, and maybe in some bubble of space you were able to survive the collapse of the building, and perhaps there was someone who survived. I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking back then, but I just remember being really disturbed by seeing pictures of people jumping out of the windows. And this article explains that it was a lot more people than I thought. I thought it was just a minority of people who were just overwhelmed by it and decided to go, but actually it was many, many people, more people than I had thought. And the article talks about how people would take turns jumping, like they'd see a few people in windows below taking turns jumping, and then maybe they would go in spurts, like one person would go, then another person would go, then another person would go, and almost like parachuters, and so they'd just wait their turn. And it's thought that the identity of the falling man is someone who, he suffered from bad asthma, and being in a burning building like that, you are given the choice: do you want to fall or do you want to asphyxiate or burn to death? And so it makes more sense to me now that in that situation, maybe I would be the one of the people who would jump out of the window anyway. It's just such a horrible thing to imagine. Would you rather fall or burn to death? But, you know, considering the height of these buildings, more than 100 stories, if I recall, 114, I think. And it took about 20 seconds to fall from the very top. And so in that last space of time, I mean, 20 seconds is a bit long, because you wonder, like, with near-death experience or whatever, your life is supposed to flash before your eyes, and what thoughts are going through your head, and even the sensation of being with flowing air, like if you're in a smoke-filled room and just jumping out, even though you know you're going to die, you have at least that sweet taste of clean air before you die. Like that was the Buddhist parable of the man who's running from a tiger, and he falls off a ledge, and he realizes he either gets eaten by the tiger or he has to jump. But then he sees a strawberry growing, and he sees that, and that gives his life meaning, and that's one thing that he's able to be mindful on. I wonder what was going through the heads of these jumpers, and if any of them found some kind of nirvana, some kind of peace. Apart from this article, I remember reading, or maybe it wasn't this article, it's quite long, and it's been a week since I read it, but someone was talking about how rescue dogs would get so bummed out just digging up corpses that volunteers would hide in the dirt, and so that they could find someone living. Just horrific. The more the more you see it, the more information. But then, as an American, you know, as someone who, you know, this event changed my life completely, in the sense that it really was the beginning of when I started to really doubt my country and its leadership, and to protest in my own small ways the irresponsible use of money for wars, for foreign wars that were blamed on 9/11 but really had nothing to do with it. It's influenced my relationship to Saudi Arabia and to Islam, and how I think about all these things. It's just really hard to overcome. And I don't think, and we say never forget, whatever. And for a while it was a big explosion of patriotism, and then we all started making fun of it, and then it's sort of like people kind of forgot about it. I remember when I went to New York City the first time was in 2011, spring of 2011, and I was actually there the exact time that Osama bin Laden was caught and killed. And I remember people were partying in the streets, and just a few days before that, I had gone to the site of the World Trade Center, which I had incorrectly remembered as a crater or something. Memory is so malleable, but I guess it was just like really blocked off. They were doing all the construction, and it was hard to parse, to understand what New York really was anyway, as my first time there. But I sat at the spot of ground zero, and I looked up and I thought, why, Lord, why haven't we caught bin Laden yet? And it was there during my brief, I don't know, it was a week or two that I was in New York City, that he was caught. And people rushed out in the streets and started partying. And I even know someone who got laid over it. He said, oh yeah, I got laid. We were all partying, bin Laden's death and all that. And that night I stayed in my friend's apartment and just watched TV and decided I didn't want to have any part of that. Like, just thinking about it, talking about it is somewhat painful for me, as it should be for any sensible American. But it's not something that, I don't know, it's like there's the anger response, there's the depression, there's, you know, it's the 7 stages of grieving or whatever, but then there's also the patriotism and the warlike sense. And I remember some people that I knew back then became super patriotic and then jingoistic, and they just wanted to defend America and thought America was number one. And then others were more cynical, like myself, thinking about how since September 11, flight has changed, security has changed, the whole world has changed. I'd say there is a distinct difference in the attitude of America before and after, and I still think it's influencing everything that we think about and do today, even though soon it's going to be the 20-year anniversary, but it still feels like it just happened. The falling man. I've never seen him so close as I do in this picture, but go to this link and you'll see it for yourself. And if you want just a really sad but interesting read, and one that takes a while, but I definitely recommend this. It's very beautifully written prose, and I really need to go back to Esquire more often. I sometimes read articles off this site, but this is the one that really has impressed me the most. So again, it's The Falling Man, an unforgettable story with photographs and it's written by Tom Junod. Link in the description. Over and out.